It's not often we get to see an actual current active UFC Hall of Famer taking on a former medalist at the Olympics, but that's what you have in this weekend's co-main event. It's the Carpenter Guida, a guy who almost reached the pinnacle a lot of different times, taking on the undefeated Mark Madsen representing Denmark, who's 10-0. And so far in the UFC for Mark Madsen, it's been a short little spurt, but he beat the Caterpillar, Danilo Belluardo, almost 2 years ago. He beat Austin Hubbard a year and 5 months ago, and then he's been away. And I've seen him doing a lot of interviews. I've seen him training with a lot of different fighters at Fight Ready in Phoenix, but I haven't seen him fight a lot, and he's almost 37 years old, which is crazy to think of because he's so young in fight years. For Clay Guida, he's almost 40. He's almost a man, but he's fought the highest level competition for years and years and years. Matt, I can remember when you and I get into MMA around 2008, 2009, Clay Guida was in these co-main event type slots, and he's still here now.
So when Anthony Pettis was the WEC lightweight champion, they didn't just give him a lightweight opportunity in the UFC. They weren't like, hey, now you can fight Frankie Edgar. No, his UFC debut was against Clay Guida, and he lost. Clay Guida beat him by split decision. Now, heavily controversial fight, but he kind of set the blueprint for how to beat Anthony Pettis. You put your head in his chest, and you don't let him throw spit and shit. It's pretty easy. Now, much harder than just that, but still.
Clay Collar did it.
Clay Collar did it. Exactly. Guy's been able to do it as of late. But for Clay Guida, we kind of know what his game is already. Like, he's a good wrestler. He's a good boxer. His jiu-jitsu's okay, but it's never really rounded out like the rest of his game. And he's so far past the hill, he's now in the prairies. And that's the problem with Clay Guida. He's at the stage of his career where Hakeem Olajuwon was wearing a Raptors jersey. It's not the same guy that you once were. And listen, I can admit, I thought he was going to beat Charles Oliveira, and that fight wasn't that long ago, which is very embarrassing for me to say. But again, at the time, I thought that the wrestling of Guida would at least keep that fight on the feet, and I thought Guida would be able to kind of out-volume him on the feet. Now, Clay Guida immediately shoots for a takedown, Charles Oliveira submits him, but we'll leave that in the past. I just don't think Clay Guida is the same fighter that he was back then. And the weird thing about Mark Madsen is that I don't really think the time off's going to bother him at all. And I'd really like to get your opinion on this because no matter what he does in training, out of training, in fighting, out of fighting, he's still just going to wrestle his opponents. That's never going to change. I don't think Marco Madsen's a guy who needs to go in there and get inactive cage time to really let his skill set unveil itself. We all know what he's going to do. He's going to try to out-wrestle Clay Guida. I don't think the last year and a half of a layoff is going to be the thing that affects him. I just think it's going to come down to Clay Guida's cardio and whether or not Marco Madsen can take him down or not.
Marco Madsen doesn't really have the greatest cardio. That scares me. I mean, against Austin Hubbard a year and 5 months ago, he goes out there, he wins the first 2 rounds, and then Austin Hubbard comes back at the end. How good's Austin Hubbard? Well, he's on this card, and, you know, if you missed the video or you're halfway through, so you're probably paying attention. Maybe the cats are listening in the background, you're cooking supper. I'm going to say this to you. I've got Austin Hubbard to beat Vinc Pichel. I could be wrong, but I've got him to win. But for me, the cardio question from the last fight, it worries me. But the guy's 10-0, former Olympian, so there's all that. But then the wrestling dynamics come into play. And for Mark Madsen, there's not a ton of huge Greco-Roman wrestlers in MMA. Yes, we can talk about former champions. Yes, we can talk about big names. I mean, what? Who is there?
Daniel Cormier.
There's Mike Grundy. There are Greco-Roman wrestlers in MMA, and there's Greco-Roman wrestlers who've had tons of success. Clay Guida, with freestyle wrestling and active hips, has been able to win a hell of a lot of fights and out-wrestle a lot of really good fighters. And if you look at it for the 5-on-in, he loses to Charles Oliveira 3 years ago. He beats BJ Penn.
The ghost of BJ Penn.
He has a great 1 round against Jim Miller. He loses to Bobby Green in a very close fight. And then he won his last time out against Michael Johnson, where somebody in the comments section, when I put the poll out there yesterday, said that in that fight, Michael Johnson beat Clay Guida, and it was controversial. No, it wasn't. Clay Guida beat Michael Johnson, because we talk about shells. Oh, poor Michael.
That's a rematch we're going to see in the BKFC one day.
I like the menace. But, Matt, in this fight, yeah, it really is tricky, because Clay Guida does still throw his hair out and about. He does throw a decent amount of volume, and his wrestling's still good, and he has a style that still makes him competitive at this point in his career. Can Marco Madsen win the first 2 rounds and coast through the third? That's my question.
I think he can. I really do. I don't think Clay Guida has the wrestling to defend the level of takedowns that Marco Madsen is going to be bringing into the cage. Because Clay Guida, here's the thing, we never really see him on the defensive with his wrestling because he is always the guy moving forward. Normally what we see is Clay Guida shooting for takedowns, and if the grappling sequence isn't going to work out for him, he just kind of gets tapped in that initial failed takedown attempt. He does not protect his neck whatsoever, at least in this stage of his career. Charles Oliveira choked him out. And guess the Brian Ortega one, he did knock him out, but still. Charles Oliveira choked him out. Jim Miller choked him out. Like, it's been a disturbing path. It's been a disturbing career trajectory for Clay Guida, at least as of late. I understand the Michael Johnson one was a win, but again, beating, and I say this, I mean every word I say, beating the ghost of BJ Penn and Michael Johnson doesn't mean that much to me. I still think Marco Madsen has at least enough of a draw that the UFC believes in Europe to where they're giving him Clay Guida on purpose. And I do think Marco Madsen's going to be able to just out-wrestle him for 2 rounds. I understand that 3rd round might look fishy, but I don't think Clay Guida has nearly as good cardio as a 29-year-old Austin Hubbard.
You think he's a draw, B?
I don't think he's a draw.
Oh, you don't think he's a draw?
I think he could be. Again, we talk about this sometimes. Like, Chris Mutino against Sean O'Malley. People were trying to sell wolf tickets and being like, oh, Chris Mutino is going to beat him. No, there's a reason the UFC matches some guys up with some opponents sometimes. And I'm not saying Marco Madsen and Clay Guida's this situation, but if Madsen beats Guida, it's a bit of a name. You can kind of use that as an excuse to give him like a Yancy Medeiros next maybe. Some guy who has a bit bigger of a name, but terrible wrestling defense. And I think there is kind of a path for Mark Madsen to become, and I don't mean a big star, but remember when Emil Meck was like, he was more well-known than the average unranked welterweight?
You beat Paul Harris. You can go anywhere.
Exactly. I could kind of see that being a career trajectory for Mark Madsen. I ever so slightly think he's going to win this.
The votes at Fight Night Picks in the YouTube community tab, 76% Madsen to 24% for Clay Guida. The comments. Jonathan Cesari says, Clay looked great in his last fight, even though I think he lost. However, anytime there's a big name on the card, there's a lot of potential to win some money. Hype sways Vegas a lot more than it should. Glenn Power says, I'd love to see Guida win. What a legend. Glenn, I agree with you. He's a legend. Again, when we get into MMA, Clay Guida was at the top, and some big fights at lightweight at that point in time. Road Tree Resistance 95, Madsen all day. I'd be surprised if Guida wins this one. And let's say Antsav says Madsen has subpar cardio and he's only better than Guida at Greco-Roman wrestling. My bet is Guida by decision. And let's go with one more. For Devin Stambul... Oh, apologies, Devin. For Devin Stambul-Ziovsky, Guida will outwork him and probably finish him. I'd be surprised if it happened, Devin. Hopefully I got close to your last name's pronunciation. Matt, if we have a look at the odds, Clay Guida open to plus 210 underdog. He's a plus 143 average on best fight odds. For Madsen, open to minus 250. He's a minus 177. The odds have increased for Guida. The fan support in the comment section is there for Guida. I think Madsen's going to be able to bank the first 2. But listen, if Guida's able to take over with the pitter-patter, if he's able to even just his way to a couple of invisible strikes that the judges count, maybe he's able to get the win. This fight's really close. I think it's going to go to decision. So the over 2.5, fight to go to decision would be where I'm at. I'm ever so slightly shading Marco Madsen, but again, it's a 50-50 on my card.
I think Marco Madsen should be able to win this one. Again, Clay Guida is not the type of guy who has that kind of power on the outside. Even if Madsen is tired.
Joe Lozon.
Oh, okay, Joe Lozon. Again, you want to talk about old fighters.
4 years ago.
Joe Lozon was good 10 years ago, so that tells you how old he was. But for Marco Madsen, I do think that the wrestling's going to be able to win out. And I don't think Clay Guida, again, even if Madsen's tired in that 3rd round, I don't think Guida has the kind of power or the volume to be able to put him away. So I do feel like this is a case of Madsen is able to bank those first 2, kind of go into survival mode in that 3rd round. And hey, he might even be able to still get takedowns in that 3rd round. I'm just going off of what I saw in the Hubbard fight. I still think Madsen should be able to get it done.
Both of us going with Denmark's Mark Madsen to get the win. Let us know down below if you got the OG legend, the UFC Hall of Famer, the Carpenter, Clay Guida. Absolutely love this fight, and you're not going to want to miss the main event video. Cannonier taking on Gastelum. So keep locked in with Fight Night Picks, as we always say. Let's get into it.